Hello, my name is Crystal Lehmanking. I am a beekeeper in Somerset County, Maryland, and have probably between 8 and 12 colonies that I keep here. I recently received my master beekeeping degrees from Cornell and from Eastern Apicultural Society. And today I'm going to talk about an idea that I really enjoy thinking about, and that is the similarity between the colony as a superorganism and the human body. Of course, this is fun for me because of my professional background as a physician, but it's also very helpful for us as we work in the apiary, work with our bees, to thinking of the colony this way. So today, just to give you an overview, we'll first look at some of the significant parallels between the colony superorganism and the human body. We'll learn some human physiology in the process, and then we'll see how, as we do this, we'll see how this can impact our management in the apiary. Okay. First, though, let's define a few terms to keep in mind during this session. An organism is any single living plant, animal, virus, etc., that is living on its own. A superorganism is an organized society, usually of insects, that functions as a whole and has some functions that are distinct and different from the individual organisms, members of that. So a colony superorganism then is a colony of individuals where the sum is more than just the individuals grouped together. And then finally, homeostasis in an organism is the maintenance of steady state. And all organisms do that. We have functions and things that we do to maintain an internal steady state. So let's look at the parallels we're going to cover now. These are very interesting. There is structural homeostasis, and this would be maintenance of a steady state by a certain structure. There is temperature homeostasis, or maintenance of a steady internal temperature. There's ventilation, steady state or homeostasis, disease-free steady state, nutrition, homeostasis, sensation and activity, which would be the neurological, chemical coordination, which is very important for coordinating the different body systems, genetic sustainability or steady state, and then life or death defense tactics, a very interesting parallel. So in our bodies, we have a skeleton and we have an organized or an order, and the way our organs are structured together. This is fundamental for our stability and for maintaining our steady state. Similarly, this is paralleled in the colony. You can think of the comb as a skeleton. This is significant. The brood nest area, which is surrounded then by the pollen and by the honey, is a structure that we see regularly in our colonies. And then the idea of the different castes of bees is a form of structure. Some bees function as nurse bees, others as processors, others as foragers. So that's also a structure that maintains steady state in the colony. Now, we are warm-blooded mammals, so we maintain a certain internal body temperature. And although the individual bees are cold-blooded, the brood nest temperature is warm-blooded. So this is a distinct difference between the colony superorganism and the individual bees themselves. While we will shiver and curl up to keep warm and also use our hair like any other mammal, the bees do the same. You can see this picture here of the clustered bees when the colony was opened on a day a little too cold. They shiver their flight muscles, they cluster together, and the outer bees form a sort of mantle or sort of fur to keep the colony warm, to keep the brood nest warm. And if things get too hot, we sweat. Similarly, the bees will bring in water and fan over it using evaporative cooling, just like we do. I've recently learned also that the bees will sometimes use their bodies as a heat shield. So it's very interesting, but it happens. Now, ventilation steady state is another significant parallel between our bodies and the bees. This diagram here represents human lungs. Besides stabilizing body temperature, though, our bodies and the honeybee colony both actively breathe to maintain optimal levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and even noxious fumes. And you can see here this familiar bees fanning at the entrance. We've all seen this. Now, disease-free homeostasis is nuanced, and there are multiple aspects of this. So I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but this is significant for both our human body and for the bees. This slide represents human skin. This is probably the most important organ we possess to keep disease outside and not in. We don't think about it a lot, but it's significant. We also have linings of our respiratory tract and our GI tract that do the same thing. All of these linings, the skin, the GI, and the respiratory linings have secretions which actively repel and kill organisms as well. This is a shot of one of my healthiest colonies, and interestingly, this colony makes propolis like crazy. Propolis is essentially the skin of the colony. In the wild, the bees will line their entire cavity, the entire usually tree cavity, with this stuff. They collect it at the entrance. They plug up the holes with it, and just like the secretions of our skin, it's got antimicrobial properties. This substance, propolis, has been shown to have beneficial effects on American foulbrood, chalkbrood, and nosema infection. The spatial organization also of the nest provides buffers and barriers similar to the skin barrier that we have. And if you think about it, the honey and pollen are outside usually of the brood nest. So there's a sort of a spatial buffer. Additionally, there's a functional buffer with the caste of bees. Again, remembering that the nurse bees are usually towards the center of the brood nest, and then the bees that perform intermediate tasks are found further out. And finally, the foragers who encounter the biggest environmental threats are the outermost bees. So this is another interesting aspect of it. And furthermore, if you think about the processing of the honeybee food, there's also a buffering system or a layering, protective layering of how food is processed. When the nectar comes in, it's handed to receiver bees who begin adding enzymes, digestive enzymes, which also have antimicrobial properties, and also the same with the pollen. The pollen is brought in, is packaged, and then processed to help suppress threats, infectious threats. Another defense mechanism, and this is one that I think is really fun, that we have as people, is our killer cells. Part of our immune system is large cells called natural killer cells. They are also accompanied by killer T cells. Macrophages have this function sometimes. This is a sketch of one of these cells. They don't actively cruise, but they are perfused through our system and through our blood with tentacles ready to smell anything that's not right. Anything that is a little sick, might be infected by a virus, might be a cancer cell, might be a cell that's dying or aging. Anything that's not right gets engulfed and eaten by these cells. So if we think of the honeybees as cells, something very similar happens in a number of ways in the honeybee colony. Here you can see a bunch of bees surrounding a bumblebee that's trying to get into the colony, just like these killer cells, and they will kill it and remove it. They won't actually ingest it, but they're functioning like killer cells. Guard bees then will remove invaders. The nurse bees will consume any abnormal eggs or larvae. The undertaker bees will remove any bees or cells that are sick or dead. And housekeeper bees will remove anything, any debris or trash. Probably any of you that has had an observation hive for an afternoon, it's county fair. I've seen it every time I do an observation presentation. There's one bee that has found a little piece of something that spends the whole time trying to find how she can get that little piece of trash out. Now, antibodies are another function of our bodies that is paralleled with within the colony superorganism. Our antibodies, this is a sketch of them. Most of the classes of antibodies resemble this sketch. What they do is that they will attach to anything that, again, is abnormal, any cell or substance that is doesn't belong, that they recognize as foreign, and they will tag it for destruction by some of these other killer cells and by cells that will destroy and eat that substance that is foreign. Similarly, the sting has the same function. Honeybees will bite or sting a threat or an intruder, and as they do it, they mark it for destruction by other bees. Here's a fresh stinger, just an example of that happening on my hand one day. Now, there's one final type of immunity that is paralleled between the bees and our human bodies, and I call that gifted immunity. Disease resistance can be transferred from the mother to baby in a couple of ways without the infant having to get the disease. This is a different kind of resistance. It's gifted through the placenta and through mother's milk. So the baby can be born resistant to quite a number of pathogens just because the mother gave them that resistance through the placenta or the milk. Similarly, and this is very exciting, this is very interesting, disease resistance may be transferred from nurse bees by the larval jelly or the food that they feed the larva, and by the queen transferred to the progeny or the offspring via her eggs. Now I'm going to tell you how this happens. This is very interesting. First, a nurse bee is infected with a virus, and she produces RNA modeled after that virus. This RNA is transferred in the royal jelly that she feeds to the larva. So the larva then have this gifted immunity to that particular virus. Similarly, the queens will absorb little fragments of foreign pathogens as they absorb their food. Those fragments are incorporated into her vitellogenin, which becomes part of the egg. So essentially, the egg has little tiny fragments of pathogens that the queen bee has encountered. Now that the egg develops into a larva, then it can develop a resistance to those pathogen fragments and have a head start. So let's move on now to nutrition homeostasis. This is an interesting topic discussed extensively by Randy Oliver and others when viewing the colony, when thinking about the superorganism idea. We ingest food, we digest it, we store it in our various tissues, muscle, fat, and liver and other tissues, and we excrete. Similarly, the colony digestive system has aspects like ours. Here we see nurse bees tending a brood nest with some trophallaxis or exchange of food going on there if you look closely. For the colony, eating, of course, happens with foraging, digesting as they process the pollen and the nectar, and storage in the form of bee bread and honey, of course. Our digestive systems also will signal when we need more or when we have plenty. And similarly, the colony does the same. Now, this is a very interesting idea, because with exchange of food within the colony, basically all of the bees and all of the nurses are aware of the nutrition status at once. How can I explain that? All the bees know at any given time what the nutrition status of the colony is. This is communicated by food exchange and probably by pheromones as well. When a colony starves, all the bees starve at once. So it doesn't take long at all for a change in the nutrition status to be experienced, expressed, and acted upon by the whole colony. Lactation is another interesting idea that is unique to mammals, to us as humans, and to the colony superorganism. As you know, mother's milk is produced by glands in the mother's body. She eats food, it's digested and processed, and then she creates milk. Similarly, very interestingly, the honeybees do the same thing. The nurse bees do not just chew up pollen and feed it, and honey, and feed it to the larva. They eat, digest the protein, glands in their head produce the larval jelly, and they feed that to the larva, especially to the young larva. So this is very different. This is milk, and some people will call the larval jelly bee milk. It's what it is. Now, sensation and activity is another interesting parallel. This isn't much of a stretch either. As you know, we have a brain, a central nervous system. We receive sensory data. We implement a response after processing it. And we also orchestrate a sleep-wake cycle, a circadian rhythm of sorts. All of these using neurons, our nervous system cells, which work together to flesh this out. Bees, same thing. The individual bees function as neurons. Colonies will receive sensory data from the hive environment and from the external environment. They will process it via trophallaxis, different types of communication, including the bee dance. And you can see here, this is a classic dance, waggle dance by honeybees. They will implement a response with food management, foraging locations, and a circadian rhythm. The colonies sort of sleep at night. They stop foraging. They do other things. They replenish and rest. And this is a very interesting parallel. The colony brain maybe is centered in the cohort of nurse bees, but really the bees all work together to do these things. Now, there's a rabbit trail here that I can't resist including. This is for the individual bees, but I would like to read to you the list of sense organs that the bees have and what they can sense. It's a little different than what we are able to do. This includes the ocelli, or the single eye, the compound eyes, the antenna, the mouth parts, the body hairs, and the feet. There are sense organs on all of these places on the honeybee's body. They can smell and taste. They can sense humidity, temperature, touch, gravity, flight speed, and sound waves. And they even have a circadian rhythm, the individual bees. They'll fold their antenna and their legs, and they'll lose a little body tone as they're resting. Now, the colony also has a voice. And I know we're all familiar with this, but just like people, the colony, the sound of the colony as a whole is an expression of what's going on. They will hum contentedly when they're working, when they're actively foraging, a great resource. That has a different sound. Under protest, with us inspecting the colony, is another sound, and there is also an outright yell, which we've probably heard. Chemical coordination, or fine-tuned coordination of all the organ systems together in our bodies, happens with hormones. These are chemicals that are produced at one spot, dispersed throughout our body, and have an effect or an impact on how another organ or a distant area of our bodies, how they work. This is a sketch of the human thyroid gland. And the thyroid, of course, as you know, is a hormone that has far-reaching impact on pretty much every body system. Bees, as they function as cells in the superorganism, communicate with pheromones. Very similar. The pheromones are excreted by some cells and then spread through body contact and other means throughout the colony and change the behavior of the other cells or the other bees in the colony. So the coordination of the colony as a whole, of the superorganism as a whole, happens in most cases and with the action of pheromones. There are a ton of pheromones in the colony superorganism that keep it working together. And I'm going to list them for you. Again, this is a rabbit trail, but I couldn't resist it. All the pheromones I'm going to read for you that I could find as I was preparing this talk that are active in the honeybee superorganism. This includes brood ester pheromone, queen mandibular pheromone, queen retinue pheromone, queen egg marking pheromone, queen feces pheromone, worker tergite pheromone, footprint pheromone, and 2 alarm pheromones, one associated with a bite and one with a sting. There's also nasonov pheromone, cuticular dance pheromones, forager bee pheromone, beeswax pheromone, and drone pheromones. So it's huge in the bee colony as it is in our bodies. Now, genetic sustainability or homeostasis is another aspect that's easy for us to recognize, a parallel easy to see between our bodies and the honeybee colony. This is a sketch of our DNA. We preserve our DNA in 2 ways. One is by repair and regeneration of our body cells, which is happening all the time from basically modified stem cells. And the other is by reproduction or offspring. Similarly, in the honeybee colony, cells or the bees, as they age or become infected or have other issues, are repaired and replaced by fresh brood. And of course, the swarm is a form of colony or reproduction of the entire colony organism. This is a classic springtime swarm here. Now, finally, I'd like to mention another parallel which I find interesting, and that is the fight or flight instinct. We as humans have what is called a fight or flight instinct. It's very well described in medicine. It involves if a threat, if we encounter a significant threat, like a home invasion or a bad injury, we will release stress hormones, including epinephrine, norepinephrine type substances, as well as cortisol or steroids. We release them into our bodies. They change the way we work. Everything now focuses on survival. And we will express that in 2 ways. We will either engage the threat, fight off the invader, or we'll cut and run. That's why it's called fight or flight. In similar way, the colony does the same. Most of us have encountered at least once or twice in our beekeeping careers, the fight instinct. Now, I'm not talking, this is not your typical colony upset that they've been opened and inspected. This is the rare, huge exodus of like half the workforce. They abandon their work in the colony. Thousands of bees come out and they are after you or whatever is invading them. This happened to me once when it was bad weather. I didn't smoke them, whatever. And basically, it can be dangerous. You can get hundreds or even thousands of stings with this. Even a gentle colony can do this on occasion. That would be the colony's flight instinct and a fight instinct. And of course, the flight instinct would be absconsion. Occasionally, if the home site just isn't working, dangerous, repeatedly attacked by a bear, whatever, the entire colony will move. This isn't swarming, it's called absconsion, and the colony will just move, find a new site, and leave. So that would be the flight instinct. Okay, so let's review what we've discussed. We've talked about structural, temperature, ventilation, steady state, disease-free, homeostasis, nutrition, homeostasis, the brain, sensation, activity, chemical coordination or pheromones, genetic, homeostasis, and defense tactics. So in practical terms, as we evaluate and manage our colonies, if we think of them this way as an entire organism or superorganism, it's very helpful in making our management decisions. So I want to mention some of the sources that I used. I did not make this up. This is not my idea. A lot of people are discussing this now. It's very helpful and a fun way to view the colonies. Tautz and Jürgen talk about the biology of the superorganism. This was from 2008, an earlier article. Randy Oliver discusses this, especially in terms of the nutrition steady state. Jamie Ellis has an excellent article from American Bee Journal on this. And Alison McAfee also has a good article. These are all accessible, easy to read. I did use some articles from Keith Delaplane, Clarence Collison as well. And then finally, the honeybee biology text by Karen and Connor is excellent in some of these details of management. So, hope you enjoy the talk. Hope it's helpful for everyone managing their bees. And thanks for listening.